Not ready? Too bad. Head back, face forward, and hold on like you mean it.
Hello and welcome to ReviewTyme's Theme Parkcast, a weekly show where we explore the ins and outs of attractions and theme parks from around the world. My name is Dom and I will be your host today as we explore the Wild, Wild West. The Falls, to be more specific, an attraction at Warner Brothers Movie World which opened sometime in the early 2000s, but we'll get to those specifics a little bit later. Movie World describes this attraction with "Let us take you on a wild ride through the county. You'll make your way past ghost towns, geysers, and wagon trains out in the Wild West before ending the ride with a splash." But before I get into that, I need to introduce the man who believed that a lot of conflict in the Wild West could have been avoided completely if architects in those days just made their towns big enough for everyone. It's Review Time co-host Luke Carroll.
I mean, yeah, it's never big enough for two, so why not just double the size? It's big enough for everyone. Simple
Exactly.
fix. So have you ever seen what a Wild West town actually, how small they were?
Yeah,
It's
they were
crazy.
just like a little shop, and it would be like a tiny little shop front where you would go and get your wares, and then you would have like a big saloon. But most of the time,
that's the most important.
the saloons were more of a way, I feel, to bring in revenue for the town.
Yeah,
because they
and
were
to bring
always
people
like the
together.
biggest.
Yeah, because a lot of people lived in ranches and stuff like that away from the town center. So there's one good way to bring people in, it's alcohol. That's still the way Australia works today.
Alcohol and ladies, but this is a PG show. We don't talk about the ladies, except
No
for the
way.
ladies that you might see out the front of the Wild West Falls attraction. Every now and then they have them dancing
The
to
little dance show
Yeah.
that plays the famous Will Smith song, the Wild Wild West.
Well, that's probably a good jumping off point to start. That for those that don't know, Wild West Falls is a log flume attraction at Warner Brothers Movie World. It is probably one of our best themed attractions.
I would
ever,
almost say
I'd say.
today, it's still standing. It might be Australia's best themed attraction that you can still ride today.
It's like it's insanely well themed. A lot of people hold it up to Disney's caliber, and I would hold it up to sort of early Disney caliber. Like, you know, when you think about your Pirates of the Caribbean without
I would say
animatronics.
that's the thing. It's like, sure, it's not as good as Splash Mountain and stuff like that, but the set dressing and the effects pretty much are on point with Disney. It is just more the lack of animatronics that set it apart from that. But it's still spectacular.
Oh, 100%.
To this day.
It is one of those attractions that, it's getting on in age. This is an attraction which opened, I believe it was around 1998. I just found my little part of the document that says December 26, 1998. And for those who have listened to our Movie World episode, really good episode, you'll notice that everything opens on Boxing Day at this park. So this is following that trend.
It's very Australian. They don't kind of do it that much anymore, but that was a huge thing. So if you're not sure why that might be the case, in Australia, our longest school holidays is pretty much starting at Christmas, and then it takes you through to the end of January. So that's when most of Australia are on their kind of 6-week holiday from school. So it's the perfect time to open up a big new attraction and drag them in. For us, that is our summer holiday.
Yeah,
we don't
that's
get, the big 3-month break like some American and European countries do. We get smaller breaks throughout the year, and then our big summer break is Christmas, New Year, moving into January.
It's kind of like the equivalent of spring break, I feel, like the big one where you go on a holiday and you go and have a party, because it's like the middle of summer, it's hot, you've
that
just
is
finished
summer break
Christmas.
for America, which they're in at the moment. But difference being, it's always quite nice whether at the Gold Coast theme parks. It's not like when you go on summer break to, Walt Disney World and you melt onto the floor anytime you walk outside the door. It's quite nice. And this, even better, is a water ride. And summer is the perfect time to ride this type of attraction because you can get absolutely demolished by water on this attraction. It's not
100%.
a baby flume where, it kicks the water away from you. You can get drenched on this thing.
This one, yeah, I know that they warn you when you're getting onto Splash Mountain. They're like, you'll get wet. And like the wetness that you feel on that.
You might get soaked, I think it says.
But with that, when you go on Splash Mountain, when you get wet, it's kind of like I'm a little bit sprinkled. Whereas this, you come off and it looks like you've just jumped into the lake.
Yeah, you can. And there's parts where sometimes it's not even the drop that gets you destroyed. Depending on what seat you're sitting on the attraction, some are just the effects while going around before the drop can get you just as soaked as the drop itself.
Oh, 100%. But before we get into sort of the majority of the traction, I also want to point out that we have just recently released a new line of merchandise specifically for Movie World's 30th anniversary. It's Hollywood, 30 years on the Gold Coast, and that's on Amusement Trading Co. Amazing artwork done by our resident artist, Luke Shakatano, and it's just phenomenal. So amusementtrading.co is where you can go and check those out, and there are some really nice designs on there, one which I've got on the way.
What's your favorite from the collection? I'm in love with the Movie World poster. So Luke's done some art essentially of the facades of all the classic Main Street Movie World buildings, and that is probably my favorite. Closely second behind, there's a little Morgan Ross collection, which, hey, we're not going to explain who Morgan Ross is, because if you know, you know.
100%.
So make sure to check it out, amusementtrading.co. You can get to it from the homepage. All the other exciting stuff is still up there as well. So thanks to ourselves, I guess, for sponsoring this episode.
It's one of those ones where, it's not, we're not paying ourselves for this. We're just really proud of the work that Luke does.
Yeah, check it out. It's great work.
So shall we jump into some of the history of this attraction?
Let's do it. The Wild West Falls.
So this originally, we sort of briefly touched on it. This is themed around the Wild Wild West film, which contained Will Smith and Kevin Kline. This is also going to be, for those who are watching this episode.
Terrible film. Sorry.
Oh, well, I'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay,
I do not, but it was originally meant to be named Rio Bravo. So it was themed.
The attraction, not the film.
Yeah. So it was going to be themed after the film of the same name. Yeah. And it still got references to Rio Bravo as well.
Yeah. So Rio Bravo's a classic, John Wayne, height of the Wild West films in the world. The cliches that you expect are from films such as Rio Bravo. And interestingly, Rio Bravo is the version of this attraction that would open, I think, at the Madrid version of Movie World. I think their version of this attraction is called Rio Bravo.
It is. So that opened up a little bit later. It opened they couldn't get the license in for Wild West Falls, and it's understandable as to why, because it was criticized heavily. Yeah. So upon the film release in Wild West Falls, which opened in 1999, which means that, as we mentioned, this opened in the attraction itself opened in 1998. So it was sort of teasing the movie. The movie hadn't come out yet. But what happened when it actually did come out is not only was it just awful, it was so negatively received that it has currently a 17% on Rotten Tomatoes with 131 critics. It also had the controversy of coming out around the same time as the South Park film at that point, which was an R-rated film. And some people were actually going to Wild West Falls, going into the wrong theater and seeing South Park. So it was this double whammy of a controversy of it being such a notoriously bad film and not even bad for a good reason. It then was
not
also
so bad, it's good.
It then also had the negative press of sort of coaxing children into South Park. So it was this double whammy. There's also
I think as well, the fact that, they made, only $220 million off a $180 million budget. But some of that money was actually people going to see South Park instead.
And look, they probably got the better film. I personally haven't seen the South Park film, but I remember certain bits. It's sort of got those really iconic, very edgy songs.
Yeah.
It was sort of at the height of when South Park's main goal was to just offend everyone, whereas now it's become
Late
more
90s,
of like
that matches up.
Yeah, 100%. And one of my favorite quotes, just to describe how dead this film was from Roger Ebert. He was a Chicago Sun-Times movie critic. He gave this 1 star out of 4, and he said, Wild West is a comedy dead zone. You stare in disbelief as scenes flop and die. The movie is all concept and no content. The elaborate special effects are like watching money burn on the screen. Which I think is an accurate depiction for what I remember of this film.
I think the biggest thing for me for this film and this attraction tied together is that it almost wasn't. Let's be honest. Because if you think of the film, The Wild West, Wild West, sorry. If you think of the film, the few things that come to mind are the weird kind of like a giant spider for some reason. But none of the stuff to me that made that film iconic shows up in the attraction. The attraction is just a generic kind of Wild West ride, which they slapped the name Wild West Adventure Ride on to try and tie back into that. Which this is, I don't think we've ever talked about on the show. One of my favorite times this has ever happened is, do you know the reason that Zippity Doodah River Run got changed to Splash Mountain?
Yes, I do know this story.
And it's the most Eisner thing of all time.
Did you want to quickly touch on it?
Yeah, so the original, in production, Splash Mountain was known as a Zippity Doodah Run, and it made that for a very long time until Michael Eisner comes and he's like, you know what? We should name this ride based off Song of the South after our hit movie Splash, starring Tom Hanks and a mermaid. So the ride is called Splash Mountain because it's based on the film Splash. Not because you splash down at the end or anything like that, just because Michael Eisner wanted to tie it into that film. He loved that film for some reason. If you look through the, context and blueprints and plans at the time, I can think of like 4 or 5 different plans to bring the film Splash into Disney parks, experiences, and resorts. And pretty much all of them failed, apart from this one, which was just by name only.
My understanding as to why he was so passionate about that film is because it's the first film that he completely oversaw as CEO of the Disney company. So this was like his...
No, because it's not. It's too early, isn't it? It's a 1984 film. Eisner doesn't come in until 1984. Maybe it was the first movie released under his tenure.
True.
And I don't know a lot about this film, but this film was quite well received at the time. It made a lot of money.
The only thing I know about this film, I've never actually seen Splash, and it's sort of getting away from the topic, so we'll try and reel it back in soon. But I just know that it's been heavily censored because in the original theatrical run, they did have this mermaid who wasn't wearing anything on top, and then they put CGI hair over her breasts.
Oh, is that what this film? I've heard that. I saw that story, but I didn't know this was that was that film.
But everyone, it just looks like it's super blurry. And everyone's like, why? But that was back when Disney is like, oh, in theaters, you can do what you want. But
I bet it wasn't a Disney film. I bet it was a Touchstone film where the wild movies lived.
I believe it was. But as we all know, the spirit of this show is that I believe something and then Luke tells me that it's wrong. So
no, I don't. That's a guess. It seems like a Touchstone film. Who knows?
So as, ride opens on the 26th of December, 1998, and it's really well received. And it does go through a couple of changes through its history to change its name. But I guess, do you want to go through the attraction as it is today? We can just quickly smash through some of the remaining history.
Yeah, so today the attraction is still known as the Wild West Falls Adventure Ride because of a licensing dispute, which there's no negative to this. I think at one point there's a pre-show where they were showing something specific about the Wild West the Wild Wild West film, because if you walk through the attraction today, there's a room that clearly used to be used for a pre-show, which you just walk straight through nowadays. And I have the tiniest memory of that room being used for a pre-show. Just me stopping in that room, though, and watching a film on a screen. That's all I have. Can't remember what the film was. Can't remember anything specific, but I remember that.
My understanding is that the pre-show room was never really fully utilized. So there are screens around the queue which show various scenes from Wild Wild West as well as various westerns to sort of get you into the mood. But the pre-show room itself, I believe they had intentions to use it. They just never did. It became just a part of the queue.
Yeah.
But when you're on the attraction, you can definitely see it. And if you watch a queue ride through, it's just before you get to the last sort of horseshoe that takes you into the actual attraction.
Similar room to Bermuda Triangle at SeaWorld. Had that same sort of go into this small room, you could tell where a screen was, and then you go onto the ride. And I believe Bermuda Triangle in its later years got rid of that pre-show as well, and then the storyline didn't make any sense. So there's precedent.
That's an attraction that we need to talk about. Bermuda Triangle is very cool
Very
and
unique.
still exists in Europe in a way.
Yeah.
It's not like the true Bermuda Triangle. It's called like Area 51.
They did theirs up. Yeah, they just recently, in the last year or so, completely redid the attraction, and it looks great.
I miss this sort of era of Australian theme parks because
the peak, in my opinion.
We talk about the attractions like Wild Wild West having a needless name, like nothing in the attraction itself had to do with Wild Wild West, but it's better than what we get now, where we get, the Batman coaster or DC Rivals Hyper Coaster, and it is entirely just a name.
What a name, folks. What does that even mean? Like, if you've never ridden an attraction, just imagine a ride called DC Rivals Hypercoaster. Like, it's the most generic. You may as well just call a ride the Hypercoaster, which is it. There's a park in, like, Indonesia that has a ride called the Boomerang Hypercoaster. Even though it's not a hypercoaster, it's just on a roof, which makes it like 50 meters high.
I think.
No, I think it's a Vekoma boomerang.
Ah, okay. And for everyone who's playing at home, take a drink.
Bing. That's why it's called boomerang.
That's true.
Hypercoaster boomerang or whatever it's called.
There are certain theme parks in the world, Nagashima Sparland being one of them, which I feel are contractually obligated to call their attractions after their manufacturing name. So you've got, the Boomerang Hypercoaster. Well, we have to put Boomerang in there. That's what it's called.
Well, there was heaps, or pretty much all of the flat rides at Nagashima Sparland. Sky Flyer, pirate ship.
So as you're going through the queue, you have all of these depictions of classic Western films, one of the few opportunities in which they actually use the Warner Brothers Western license. Now, I haven't ridden this attraction in a very long time because most of the time when we go, the attraction's down. It does go down for a significant portion of the colder parts of the year.
I want to say, it's probably been 4 years maybe since. I want to say we've ridden it together one time in the last 4 years, but the last time I have actual memory of riding the attraction is 2017.
Yeah.
So that's a while ago.
I believe that we managed to sneak on a ride. Like, it was within a day of when it reopened or it had just closed. And maybe we had managed to sneak on a ride. In 2020?
Early 2020, we might have, because that would make sense. Like when we went in January of 2020, so it would make sense for the attraction to be open that time of year.
Yeah,
that's probably the last time we've ridden it, and that was after it kind of went through a refurbishment, which we'll go over a little bit later. But yeah, I think the weird thing about the queue is it's got this relatively well themed queue. It's playing, Western films. It's got Western theming, I guess, even though Western theming in most theme parks is like rusty, old work equipment. There we go, Wild West.
Yeah, so this sort of follows, we'll get into the full ride experience in a moment, and we'll try our best not to make this one drag on, because whilst this is an amazing attraction...
Hey, guess what drags on? Talking about a podcast dragging on.
This is true. So... Well, what if we just get straight into it, into the whole ride experience itself?
Because the queue is picture a Wild West queue. Congratulations, you've made it. Now we're to the loading bay, which, all right, so you get to the loading area, and this part's kind of cool because it's a continuous load.
Yeah.
So it non-stop. I'm trying to think of other rides around the world that have this kind of system, but the good thing is it helps the throughput. This has, for Australia, a really high capacity.
Yeah, so I looked up the capacity of this attraction, and I believe it's the highest within Australia. Like, it pales in comparison to some of the Disney attractions, but for Australia, this has a capacity of 1,440 guests at a theoretical peak. Now, that's if they were running at maximum efficiency with all of the boats. And which it doesn't need to hit that. Like, it's never really that popular. So
think about, last time we were at Warner Brothers Movie World, we were just off the cuff counting dispatch times for DC Rivals Hypercoaster, which is arguably the most popular attraction in that park.
Yeah.
It was running like 6-minute dispatches, which means it's only sending out 10 trains an hour. So it's only kind of sending out 180 guests an hour. And that's the most popular attraction. So 1,500 odd guests an hour. That's probably the entire park on some days, every hour.
Well, that's why when this attraction's open, you think that it's not very popular because you go and you can literally walk and get straight on.
Yeah.
Whereas when you think about it, if it's taking you an hour within a line for DC Rivals, then of course if it's going through, what were you saying, around 200 riders in an hour? When you've got an attraction that can do almost 12 times that, then it's going to bump through.
It just eats people. And that's the thing. This has still got a kind of old school restraint system, which they are changing. So a lot of Australia is changing at the moment due to a few incidents that have unfortunately happened. And the good thing is, because of those, a lot of our safety requirements and regulations in Australia have been changed to be safer for the guests. So one of the big things is I've seen, I don't think it's public. Somebody shared it with me. I don't remember who. Thank you to the person who did. I've seen the concept for the new boats that are going to be in this. So currently it's one of the loosey-goosey lap bar systems where, hey, just pull down your lap bar. As long as it clicks, you can kind of hold your legs up and fake that you've got a really tight restraint when you don't. Problem with that is, if you've got an adult and a kid sharing the same lap bar, when you pull down, even if the adult's not doing the loosey-goosey trick, the kid is going to have enough room that they theoretically could probably step out of the ride.
Yeah, and there are plenty of points in which you can do that on this attraction.
I'm sick of this attraction now. And then that is probably not really a great idea. So I've seen pictures of the new boats and they're going to have two lap bars. So each person will have an individual lap bar so that a kid isn't going to walk off. Which, was it at Hong Kong you saw a guest just walk off a ride one day?
There were incidents. So I haven't personally seen this myself, but when I was in Hong Kong, I got to know a couple of the cast members and sort of got to hear some of their stories. One of their biggest problems that they had is within some attractions, it was not uncommon for guests to literally just get up and go, I'm done. Like, I'm done with It's a Small World. So if you'll notice, like, It's a Small World at Hong Kong, I'm not sure if it's exactly the same at all of the other ones, but specifically at Hong Kong, it seems to be that there's never any sort of platforms near the It's a Small World boats. There's like quite a big drop off, so you can't just step out and get onto it. So it's sort of like an elevated trough. But it is within a trough and then everything else doesn't have water in it. So, but I have heard stories of people literally just hitting a point where they're like,
I'm bored.
Done. I believe
Next ride, please.
Buzz Lightyear. They always had that problem as well because it was just an Omni mover that you could go boom, Like if you were forceful enough.
Yeah.
It's just one of those bizarre situations that's a cultural sort of phenomenon where I can't explain it. I don't know, but it just happened. So
yeah. So we'll start. We're on the ride now, and you kind of go out of the station. And correct me if I'm wrong, but does it go something like this? Welcome to the Wild West Falls. And then a voice goes, please remain seated while on this attraction.
So I always keep an eye on voiceover. As someone who does a lot of voiceover, I'm always paying attention to the different intricacies of voiceover over the years in Australian attractions. It used to have a voice that literally on repeat from a single speaker within sort of like a 10 to 20 second area of the ride. It would just be like, please remain seated with your arms and legs inside the vehicle. I am happy to announce that the last time I rode this attraction, which as we both know, we can't figure out when, we have ridden this sometime recently.
I'm pretty sure it would have been 2020, right?
But I think so. It was sort of during that weird period when we could travel and then they're like, no, you can't travel anymore.
Not anymore.
But now they actually have a themed voice. So it's like, whoa, you're about to go on the wildest ride in the wilderness.
I just think combine the two stories, He's the cliche. Howdy, partners. And good on whoever it is. There's some acting in this rather than animatronics, which we'll get to in a little bit. They are the most camp 90s depictions of Wild West characters, which is kind of great, in all honesty. So the first part,
I was just going to say, this whole attraction, when you go into it, it has that camp Wild West feel.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about sort of leading up to the first element?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, this is kind of... It doesn't feel necessarily like a realistic Wild West. It feels like the cliche Wild West from the movies.
Yeah.
Which is great. So you go around this first part and it builds nicely. There's this slow section where you now hear the theme voice, where previously you just hear generic Von voiceover telling you to remain seated. And you go up the first lift hill, and if you're on the left-hand side, you can look down and watch the junk trap. I don't know what it's called. But if you look down, there's always like bottles and packets of chips like swirling around in this part for some reason.
Yeah, it's like where they suck in the water for the fountains and all of that. Yeah.
So you're going up, you get to look at the trash, and then this is probably, in my opinion, the coolest part of the ride. You get to the top and you spin around and you see there's these two miners there. So you're facing towards these two miners and they say like, they threaten you or something and they're like, hey, you get out of these parts. And your boat goes towards them and then they fire at your boat and it goes down backwards, down like a roller coaster drop almost.
Yeah. So this is a very cool and exciting element. I really haven't experienced it outside of this attraction, but the best way you can describe it is it's kind of like a roller coaster and you almost have no time to anticipate it. You start going backwards and then suddenly you're just like forced about. So it goes down and then goes up and then goes down and splashes.
It's like an airtime hill.
Yeah, it is very cool. And you then splash back into the water in like complete darkness as you exit the cave.
Yeah. And then you get this cool view because you're going backwards. You can look at kind of the mountain. Because one, we didn't explain, this has one of the coolest facades. Not just in Australian theme parks, in the world, I would say. This has got the facade of a giant kind of mesa. And outside, like, the mesa, you can see there's a little hut. And the hut is where the drop is. So you've got this massive, and this thing probably 20, 30 meters across?
Yeah,
it completely hides the back of the ride.
It's 40 meters tall, I believe.
Yeah.
Because the drop itself is 20, and you're sort of halfway through that facade.
Yeah. And then the cool thing about this is, if you just watch that facade, you would honestly think you went inside, up, drop, that's the end of the ride.
Yeah.
No. When you finish this backwards drop section, you've got like a few minutes now of just kind of cruising around the Wild West. So you go backwards into this part. You get to a point where it does like a turnaround And this is where if you get unlucky, you can get absolutely drenched because the turnaround has like a geyser. And if at times, weirdly, it shoots the water up and it just lands in your lap.
You just get absolutely annihilated. But this is the point in which it sort of uses a really clever technique to get you back facing the right direction. So up until that geyser, you're facing backwards. And then it puts you in this little trough where the water's moving in such a way that there's no mechanics here to force you to go forward. It is just the movement of
the
water.
flow of water. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's really interesting. But so there's no turntable or anything. You just go into this trough. It sort of like doofs you and then you get pushed back out, moving forward. And this is when you sort of get into some of the varied scenes of the outside portion. So you come across the first scene, which originally just used to be a train track, which had a speaker which made it sound like a train was coming for you. And it was like the weakest speaker in the world. I think if you bought like a Google Home Mini, but I'm saying this for context,
put it on 80% volume.
Those things are tinny. Like they are full of treble. They are not very good speakers. Sorry, Google. We're going to get sued now. Last week we were promoting them. Now we're telling them that their product's awful.
Evening it out.
But like for context, it's just like a beep, beep. Like it is so weak of a sound. And then as you would go past, you would hear like a booming explosion. So it was meant to be like they put up TNT to sort of make the train explode, but it was already a destroyed bridge as well.
No, so that's the second version. So the previous version, it just had this noise. It was like pee, pee. And then you go around the corner and there was like a bridge. And that was kind of it. Now, that was confusing, I guess. Now it's arguably more confusing because you hear the toot toot again and you go around the corner and there's like a blown up bridge. But the train is stopped at the top of the blown up bridge, but all the TNT is still there and hasn't exploded.
And I think as you go around the corner, I've been confusing the two. It then explodes.
Yeah, it goes
and then,
boom, boom, boom. But you can see it in your it's in front of you when it explodes.
You can just look back.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that they went to Bunnings one day and they bought PVC pipe and red spray paint that must have been on sale because they probably bought in PVC pipe that spray painted red to look like TNT. No joke. There's probably over 1,000 sticks of TNT in this attraction after a refurbishment in like 2017 or something.
Somebody went on Big Thunder Mountain and really liked the exploding tunnel scene. Like,
so
really
made it the entire
ride. Like, this TNT is everywhere except for the next two scenes. Which the next scene after the train, did you like that segue? That was a pretty good one. So the next scene afterwards is probably the most boring. Not in terms of content, but just nothing is happening. So it's like a little Indian village. There are some teepees and then there's a painted sort of facade behind it. And all it has is a speaker that's just like doom, 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 and that's it.
The facade might be so faded, you could almost not tell the difference between the painted flat and just a white wall at this stage. But
it was painted a very long time ago.
I don't think they've retouched it since the 98 when this attraction opened. Yeah.
And then you get into arguably what I would say is the best scene.
Yeah.
It's just a classic Western scene. And this is the point in which people go, where are the animatronics? Because you go into a Wild West town. And it has one of the best gags I love is that as you're going into the town, it has like the name of the town and then it has a little sign that says population. And it's got it's just painted on wood. And then you hear a gunshot and someone go, ow. And then a little piece of the sign falls off and the population goes down one.
Yeah, I love that little gag. It's super simple, but it's super cool.
And this whole scene is like full of those. So it's designed, I feel like what
very
it's going for
gaggy.
is you imagine the various
it's like
actors.
a ghost town almost.
Yeah.
Like, because, effects are happening. So there's that one where you hear it, and that one you could be like, oh, they're inside. But then you'll go to another part, and there's like a bar fight almost in the saloon. And so you'll see the door kind of blow open, and then the railing for the saloon will fall apart, and then a splash will appear in a horse trough that's below the balcony. And it's obviously been like, oh, somebody's been thrown out of the saloon. They've broken over the balcony and landed in the water. But there's no one there. So it is like, is this a ghost? Is it meant to just be, imagining what it's like?
Nobody knows. But it's sort of full of all of these gags. I highly recommend people to look up a POV. I believe that Theme Park Review have a fairly good one of the original iteration of the attraction.
Yeah, true. The pre TNT-ing version, I guess.
It's one of the few attractions on the Gold Coast that they will be okay if you have like your phone and your bag and all of that on you. So usually they're fine for recording on a GoPro and stuff like that. However,
we have
for some
footage
reason
on this attraction from like 2014.
We don't. What I do have footage of, though, is the original version of the log ride at Dreamworld, which is arguably more valuable now as that ride is demolished. Which I need to hit up Dreamworld. I need to buy the sign if they've still got it. I'll give you good money for that Dreamworld.
It's in the skip out the back, I'm sure, unfortunately.
Well, I was driving past. If you walk through, if you drive past one of the roads at Dreamworld, you can see there's just like a scrapyard of old stuff that's still hanging out.
That's what we call a premium Luke and Dom thing to do. We had hired a car and we were like, ooh, if you go this secret road, you can get a backstage glimpse into literally a scrapyard out the back of Dreamworld where they just dump stuff they didn't need anymore.
That is, though, where the rumored resort's going to go. Because I completely forgot about this until someone mentioned it the other day. But Dreamworld is doing like a whole resort facility.
Yeah. And so is Movie World, but Dreamworld actually officially announced theirs, where Movie World's only unofficially announced. It's very strange.
Movie World's announced Hotel V, I believe, or something similar in that name, which was meant to be. I think they didn't even announce that. They just registered the trademark.
The trademark, yeah.
So it's all weird, but completely irrelevant to the ride experience.
Especially with the Brisbane Olympics coming up in 2032, fingers crossed. I know a lot of people say, well, it doesn't make sense to put any new expansions in because Olympics are only for 3 weeks. Yeah, but that doesn't, like, if you can drag people over to your theme park, sure, they're only for 3 weeks, but there could be millions of people in your city at that point.
Yeah.
If you can drag them over, and the best thing is, it's not as if those attractions and new stuff you put in is only going to last 3 weeks. You can tie it into the Olympics for advertising, and then it's there for the rest of the time anyway.
And if you convince the government that you're worthwhile having around,
give me a little bit of something.
Yeah, come to Brisbane Olympics and maybe come down to Movie World whilst you're at it.
Yeah, exactly.
So after you go through the ghost town scene, and I highly recommend for people to go and check out a POV of this, because I don't want to describe all of the gags because they're worthwhile seeing. If you have the opportunity as well, go to the park. Because
it's great.
Come to Australia when you can. We don't even know when anyone can come in. We don't know when we can leave.
I don't even know when I can go to the Gold Coast, let alone anyone else, unfortunately. But hey,
we'll get there eventually. But once you finish going through the sort of the ghost town, which fun fact, just before we go through this, they have Halloween horror nights, or not Halloween, Fright Nights at Movie World. And that's sort of their equivalent of Halloween horror nights. Yeah. And they used to do an ultimate tour where you could actually walk through this. They don't do that anymore, but I want to do that. I want to walk through this scene. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, they turned it into, it was essentially an exclusive kind of scare maze almost. But it took place in this town, so you got to walk around it, which is just that classic theme park lover thing of like, I just want to walk around an attraction.
I will pay good money to just go where no one else can go. It's sort of like, theme park fans take pride in knowing stuff that other people don't.
Yeah. And other people probably don't even care about.
Yeah, you'll go to a park with someone who's really into theme parks and it's like, did you know that piece of wood over there was actually painted by John M. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's brother? And that people are like, I don't care.
No, I didn't know that. But also, I don't really care.
So once you've gone through this ghost town, you then get into the final lift hill for the drop. And I will say, this lift hill goes for a very long time. It's sort of like a minute.
It's a bit clack, 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 clack. Like the anti-rollbacks are very loud. And it's got a lot of TNT in it, of course.
It's got a lot of TNT and
but
a lot
it might
of
also
sparky
have
sounds.
The greatest original character at Movie World, the Get Out guy.
So what they do, they don't use animatronics, but they have sort of, I guess for lack of a better word, it's like a really bad version of Pepper's Ghost. Well, not really bad. You can just see the screen. So it's like a TV screen, and they do this for the shooty guys. The shooty boys at the start are on TV screens, and it's just a guy who appears, like he fades in from black, and he's like,
I'm not sure
what are you doing here? And then he shoots at you, and he's like, get out of here. Get out.
She's gonna blow.
But my favorite thing is, during a single day, and I'm not kidding in this, you can sort of have a guessing game as to whether that effect's actually going to work.
Yeah. And I think kind of throughout the day, it's almost like he gets dimmer somehow. Like the TV can't operate for 8 hours straight without kind of dying, because you're right in the morning and he'll be crystal like clear and brisk. And then you're right in the afternoon, you can just see him if you squint your eyes.
Yep. It's also one of the fun ones where when it's actually off and not working, you can see the no source little icon that appears in the center of the TV. You can still hear him, but it just says no source on the TV screen. So once you finally get through this lift hill, it takes a while. Beyond that guy, nothing really happens. He happens about midway through. Then you get up to the final drop. So this has another sort of turntable, which takes you towards this final drop, and
which is kind of cool because if you're on the left, so this drop has doors on it, but if you're on the left, you can kind of look out to the side of the boat and just see essentially dropping off into nothing, and you know you're about to go down it. Yeah. It's one of those rare anticipation moments that you get within our theme parks. We don't have too many that really sort of build up towards that final drop. Like, we've got regular lift hills, but this has got the swelling music and it's got all of those voice effects and you can hear it sort of really working up. So I find that one of the best parts of this drop is the anticipation that you get leading up to it. And also, you're on a log flume. Like, this is a big, steep drop, which you've just got a lap bar for. So there is that sort of element of, oh, I'm in danger. And they used to have this effect, which I've seen some video of it before. There used to be like a barrel that would expand as if it was about to explode. And then as you went down the drop previously, you'd hear that explosion as if it was that explosion that pushed you out of the mine. So it's got a 20-meter drop, which is about 66 feet. So it's not huge, but it's definitely... Doesn't sound like much, but think of like the Splash Mountain drop around the world. That's a pretty big drop for a lot of people. This one is 5 meters taller. That's 15 meters, and this is 20. So it's 30% taller than Splash Mountain. It hits 70 kilometers per hour or 43 miles per hour for our American listeners. And that's fast. Like it feels... For a flume ride, especially if you did the loosey-goosey trick with your lap bar. Oh. No, the problem is that you are so much taller than me and your legs like poke up. So whenever I'm next to you, I'm like... You're doing the loosey-goose challenge, not by choice. I'm a solid foot like shorter than you. It's quite hilarious when you see us in the parks because I look like Danny DeVito. And we're going to do the Blues Brothers one day with the two of us. And so
we'll get on attractions like this and I'll be like, oh boy, I'm going to die. So I'm just going to fly out at the top.
You're either going to fly out or my knees are going to be crushed to dust because you've ratcheted the lap bar down so aggressively.
You haven't lived until you've gone to a theme park with a friend, and as they get into an attraction, you jump down on them and they're just in agonizing pain.
With their individual lap bars.
DC Rivals is the best for that one.
Just staple.
Got to. It's the rules. And so after this, once you've gone through that final drop, they have these awesome fountain effects. Depending on the time of the year, if it's at a colder time of the year, the fountains are slightly after you go past. So they're purely for aesthetic reasons. But if you're during summer, it actually is slightly before your boat goes past. So the water falls into your boat.
And you probably get more demolished by the fountains than you do by the splash. Like these things, if they hit you, good luck. You're going to need a towel.
That's why I don't recommend taking bags on this because your bags will get wet.
If you've got a friend who sits off, which a lot of the time I find drop like thrill rides like this, big water rides, have the highest chance of someone in your group not wanting to come on with you, which means they're just volunteering themselves to look after 10 bags.
Bag handler. That was my mum at Disneyland. Like anything that she couldn't expressly see what it did. So like Space Mountain, any roller coaster or anything like that. She's like, no, thank you. I'm going to stay with the bags.
I managed to get my grandmother the second time she took us. She took myself and my sister when I was 16, my sister was 8. We managed to get her on Pirates of the Caribbean. And even that drop, she got off. She was like, that's it. I'm done. Not riding anything again. And she became... And then it must run in the family because then when my mum and my family came to visit me at Walt Disney World when I worked there, I managed to convince mum to go on Space Mountain. And I thought that one of us was going to die on the ride. It was probably going to be me who got murdered after it, the way she was screaming through with hatred in her voice. Like, how dare you get me on this roller coaster? Like, to her, the fact that she couldn't see it was like a really good way for me to get her on it.
Yeah. I did the exact same thing with my dad as well. And we'll wrap up. The attraction's pretty much done here for those that are like, what happens next?
You get a photo.
Yeah.
When you go down the hill, you get a cool photo. So make sure you do a weird pose or get some maps or do something silly.
We always do something silly. You can get a really cheap photo pass. Usually it comes with your season pass as well at Movie World. So this is one of the prime attractions to get a really funny photo with your friends because you can take your bag on. So we have ones where it's like we've got maps out. I think there's one of me and one of my good friends kissing.
That sounds about right.
Which I remember when we actually went to get it, he's like, oh, it's been censored. And I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah, Tower censored it. I'm like, oh, can we have it? And he's like, yeah.
He was like, well, I guess because the group in front of us got a similar picture, but it was like, he's like, well, if I let the group in front, which was like a buff dude and his girlfriend, he's like, well, if they're allowed to have a kissing photo, I guess you guys are too.
It was 2014. It was a different time up in Queensland. So I just wanted to quickly touch on as well. My dad had a similar experience on Space Mountain. I got him on there. I'm like, it's a tame roller coaster. To me, it's a tame roller coaster. To him, he did this thing where like he became a kid that had just gone into like a candy store and the owner had come up and gone, you get all of this. This entire candy store is yours. And he's just like, whoa. And the entire time he's like, he's just sort of like flailing about. He's like grabbing my leg to do, that pinchy thing that you do on someone's leg? And he's like, he's like freaking out, but he's like screaming in happiness. And then afterwards, he just gets off. He walks out, goes to the gift shop. And I'm like, oh, do you want to go again?
Son.
And he's like, no.
I will never be doing that again. Are we going to get to that stage when we're, in like 20, 30 years? Is Space Mountain going to be too thrilling for us?
I I wonder that, but then again, I know people who are our age. Like, I don't think it's an age thing. I just think it's a tolerance thing. I know people who just don't do rides because it's not for them. You know, people who go to Disney parks and they won't go on any of the thrill rides at Disney parks because they feel that's too much.
That's too much,
Yep. My wife won't go on Tower of Terror because it's too much for her. I'll happily, I haven't done it yet.
Back.
But I'm very close to jumping out of a plane because I reckon I could do that.
Nah, I wouldn't.
The only way, and I have talked to you about this before, I'm like, okay, what if we do a video where it's like the ultimate thrill jumping out of a plane? And you're like, oh, well, if it's for a video.
Which we won't say who it was with, but we almost were going to do that with a rather big company, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah, we got an offer
earlier in the year, which it never came to fruition. But that's the closest you're ever probably going to get me, and it's because it was an agreement with a company who were going to fund it. That was it. That's why I would have done it.
The whole offer was like, we will give you just X amount of money. Tell us what you want to do.
Costs, spend it how you want, essentially.
And we're like, oh, fun. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. A couple others did. And those things happen. That is the industry. But other than that,
part of production.
That is Wild West Falls.
Or previously, Wild West Falls.
Or previously, Rio Bravo. Do you have anything else that you want to say about this?
I was just going to say this attraction, pretty much everyone praises it in my opinion, but I even still think it's underrated.
Yeah.
As a holistic attraction, the full package experience, this is the best ride at Warner Brothers Movie World. For the most people. DC Rivals is going to be too thrilling for families. This ride, pretty much everyone can do it together. And it's not just a big thrill for the sake of a big thrill. As an overall package, theming, atmosphere, pacing, thrills, that I feel is probably the best all-round attraction.
Yeah, this is the bar, in my opinion, for when it comes to themed experiences in Australia. And off the top of my head, anything recent doesn't even come close. The only things that were sort of close to this experience were released either before or just after this, whereas nowadays a lot of themed experiences don't even seem to get anywhere near this, which, for the reasons that are quite complicated, and maybe we'll touch on it one day, but basically Australian theme parks got into a thrill war,
an arms
for lack of a better
race.
Word. There was a point
where... race to the bottom where, we're just going to put in big, thrilling steel monstrosities. Oh, and tickets to 4 theme parks, $100 season pass for the year.
Yeah.
And they're struggling still to break out of that, even though that was 10 years ago.
And it just became that problem of the rides got bigger, the tickets got cheaper, and then they found one day, they're like, oh, we're out of money. So we'll have to sell the land underneath our park.
Oh, yes.
Which,
how can we forget?
Anyway. So, beyond that, I also agree this is an incredibly underrated attraction. I would, if this left, if for some reason Movie World turned around one day and said that this attraction is closed, I would honestly say that you would need 3 or 4 rides to make up for this. They cannot lose this ride whatsoever. It is vital, and you can tell by the work that they've done on it and how often it's down and it's under refurbishment and they're changing the trains and all of that. They need this attraction because it just eats people, but it's also necessary for Movie World to maintain its identity. If they lose this, it just becomes another thrill park.
Yeah, this is kind of the thing that's holding them on one side of a Six Flags compared to a proper theme park, in my opinion.
So currently, it's hanging out at like a Knott's level, whereas it could very easily fall over the edge to Six Flags. So I know you can do it, Movie World. You have the power. Just never touch this attraction.
Please.
Treat it like a deity that it is. Well, I think that does it for this episode.
That'll wrap it up.
Well, if you want to get in touch with me about anything that we've talked about today, you can find me on Twitter at ReviewTymeDom.
I'm at ReviewTymeLuke.
And you can find us both at Time Review or ReviewTyme everywhere else. Luke, do you have any idea about what's coming up next week?
Might be, we often talk about, we're imagining ourselves walking around a theme park. You'd love to say that. But guess what? Next week, we're actually going to get in a time machine to walk around some theme parks from the past.
Nice.
Little teaser there for you. We'll see you then.
I'm ready. See you all next week.
Bye.
ReviewTyme's Theme Parkcast is brought to you by Luke Carroll and Dom Lacey. A big shout out goes to our newest Patreon, Dia Han, long-term Patreon, Brendan Brown, and to you, the listener. ReviewTyme's Theme Parkcast will be back next week.